Alright, welcome to another class, Airbrushing for Newbies, Primo Customs, and everybody that takes care of me. We're talking about prep today. It's the most important part about airbrushing, custom paint, anything you do to put an application on a surface, it needs to be prepped properly. We got to start from masking, to sanding, to priming and sealing. Today we're not going to shoot any material. Otherwise I have to put on mask and suit and all that stuff. So what we're going to do is go into how to prep. If a customer brings you a job, you have to be able to look at it and go, alright, how do I put paint on this surface? Number one question is, how do I prep something? Or at least it should be. It's more important than actually being the best airbrush artist. If it doesn't stick around, what good is it? So we have to talk from start to finish. Customers are going to bring you something, you're going to look at it. First thing you have to look at is, okay, I have a surface here that has to be painted. What do I need to protect before I can actually get in there and start scratching the surface? Because that's what we have to do to prep a surface. We need to go in there, we need to scratch it all up, take care of the shine. If there's a little bit of a shine to it, paint's not going to stick. Now, depending on what type of paint we use is going to depend on how we're going to prep it. Most of the waterborne paints need a huge tooth in order for that paint to really grab in and stick to it. So what we're going to do is add the tooth, sand it down and get it ready for that primer, sealer, or straight to base coat. Now with a helmet that's already been painted, there's a clear coat over it. This is stickers underneath the clear coat. Now we can go in there and remove all of the sticker, or due to the fact that it's underneath the clear coat, we could go in there and scuff it up, add a high build primer and sand it down until it's smooth, and just bury the sticker into the finish. Since it's already stuck down, everything's good, it's not peeling, it's not chipping, it's not cracking, we don't need to worry about going in there and fixing what's there. Now we get some helmets that are a plastic helmet. Now this helmet is basically it's a fireman's helmet, and it's hard plastic. Now with this, I use a completely different system. I go in there and I scratch it, I give it a huge tooth, and then I use an epoxy style primer on it. Now the reason why is because these are designed for paint and stuff not to stick to it. It's designed to repel anything that touches it. You can put stickers on it, but that's about it. So we need to make it to where we can actually get paint to stick to it. I got a product over here in the corner I'm going to go grab, I'll be right back. Now this product is a painter's best friend. This product is what I call insurance. Now we're still going to sand it, we're going to really work on the surface very well, but this is an insurance coat. This makes stuff stick. It's an adhesion promoter. What it does is it goes in and softens up what's underneath it. The actual base design of it was for door jambs in cars, where you can't get in there and sand all the really tight areas and really get a sand area there, a tooth, a physical tooth. This is a chemical tooth. This will go in there, bite into the surface, and allow you to paint on top of it without fully sanding it. Now, like I say, it's an insurance. It's not, I wouldn't suggest trying to go in there and just spraying this over something super shiny and expect it to stick. It's designed for that, but I wouldn't trust it. Alright, getting back to the helmet. Before you can get to a primer stage, any plastic surface, 95% of them if they're not painted, is going to have a mold release on it. When they make these products, they usually use a mold, or they have to, and they inject it. And the mold release is an anti-stick agent. It's designed not to have stuff stick to it, once again. So now we need to go in there and we need to get that off. This goes for front bumpers on cars, rear bumpers, any of plastic molded injected parts, dashes, interior parts on cars, helmets, batting helmets, hockey helmets. They all have a non-stick mold to it. So we need to get that off. Hot water, and I use a product called Comet. There's all different style, abrasive style cleaning agents, just for kitchen and bath and whatever. And you go in there and you wash it with that. And what that does is that the warm water and the soap help pull it all off. A lot of people use borax. So you go in there and you just clean it, make sure it's all clean. We do that with helmets, motorcycles, basically anything you're painting, wash it really good. Just go in there and scrub it the best you can. Once you have it clean, then you have to start thinking about, okay, now it's time to get down and dirty and prep it. So you go in there and there's a couple different ways of doing it. Over here we have sandpaper, different style sandpapers, Scotch-Brite pads, and sanding blocks. All right, we have sanding papers. We use all different grits. There's numerous grits from 36 grit all the way up to, I think, 3,000. They might even have 4,000 grit sandpaper. Scotch-Brite pads, or abrasive pads. Scotch-Brite's a name from 3M. They seem to hold together the best. I've used other brands, Mirka, Norton, a lot of different companies. For water-based paints and primers, I like to use the red or maroon pads. Sanding blocks. Now these are awesome sanding blocks from Soft Sanders, and they're a foam block that's highly flexible. Now they can also be real rigid. Now this doesn't seem that rigid. You put 2 pieces of sandpaper sticky back on this and you won't be able to bend this. So you can use this as a long block, real hard block to block out a surface, or you can arc it and use it to sand helmets. So that takes care of the sanding stuff. Now we're going to go back over to the helmets. And we look at the helmet, we go, okay, there's this helmet, I'm painting everything on it. There's not one area that we're not going to paint. I'm going to wrap the paint underneath a little bit, so that way when you look at underneath the brim, you don't have to think about, okay, we got to paint this afterwards, or you got bright yellow under here. Think of everything that's going to show when you paint, and go 1/2 inch to 1 inch past where it's going to show. That way you don't have any problems later painting a helmet, nice custom outside, and then you look underneath it and you go, what happened? Door jams, all that stuff you got to think about. You got to think, make sure the paint goes underneath. Look at the motorcycle tank. That's the underneath of it. Paint it high gloss. Make sure that everything looks good, due to the fact that when you look at a motorcycle tank, you look at the valve cover, which sits right here, you're looking at the reflection of what's underneath the tank. So think about that when you prep stuff. Sand it all, make it all real nice and clean underneath, and paint it. It's going to make your customers love you a lot more. Think of the bottom of a fender. When you're looking at the motorcycle fender, if you look at the rim, what are you going to look at? You're going to look right up underneath that fender, and if it's all, bright green and your bike's black, it's going to look weird. So think about prep everything. Make sure that it's ready for paint. Even if you're not going to paint it, go ahead and put a little scuff on it and blow a little base on it, or sealer at least. Okay, now since this helmet, I'm painting everything, there was no masking to do prior to painting. Now we did pull out the inside, and I pulled off some of the straps that came down. So if you can pull stuff off, it's better. But there's times that you need to make sure that you don't get, first off, sand scratches on something, because you can't unsand scratch something. So if you're sitting there working on a car and you got window trim around the windshield and moldings and stuff like that, don't go in there and try to stand next to it and hope you don't scratch it. Glass, really easy to scratch. So if you're sanding a car and you're working next to it and you're using a DA or sandpaper or something and you slip and you hit that glass, now you have to sit there and try to polish it out or pay somebody to polish it out, or worst case scenario, replace it. So always think, okay, glass, mask. Chrome, stainless steel, mask. If you can't pull it off. If you can pull it off, all the better. But there's always that chance that you're not going to be able to pull it off. Sometimes customers don't want to pull out a complete interior in order to pull off a badge. So like boats, a lot of the boats that you work on, if you're just working on, pontoon boats and stuff like that, the whole entire interior has to come out in order to get those emblems off. So something to think about. If you have a vehicle that has an emblem on it, like the helmet did, this had 2 screws in it that we were able to get out. Now, a lot of the times it's double stick tape. So now you have something that's double stick taped on a surface and you need to get that off. The easiest way to get it off is, if you're completely repainting, is to grab a metal spreader, take a piece of tape, throw a piece of tape on it, and fold it over. So now you have a piece of tape on the metal part, and you can go in there and you can scrape like the surface without hurting and digging into the paint. So that's one way to use that. Another thing that works really well is a piece of fishing line. Take a decent fishing line, wrap it up. If you have leather gloves, want that because it does cut into your fingers. And you take the fishing line and put it on both sides of it and just kind of saw back and forth. And what that'll do is that'll just sit there and cut through the foam tape. And it'll leave the glue behind, but that's not a big deal because we got products for that. One of the products is a rubber wheel. Once you have adhesive down, if you're pulling off pinstriping tape, vinyl graphics, if you wanted to get the vinyl graphics off of this and it was on top of the helmet, or if you pull off an emblem like we did here, pulled off an emblem, and now we have the glue left behind. So we go in with this rubber eraser wheel. These things are really cool. It's made out of rubber. And this is from a company called Astra. We get it from Auto Body Tool Mart, Auto Body Supply stores, whatever. You can get them all over the place. I think Eastwood has them. Now this hooks into a drill, and then you sit there with the drill and you just go back and forth over the glue adhesive, and it'll pull it right off. If it's vinyl tape or bumper sticker or whatever, it'll go in there, and this will not hurt the paint. Unless the paint job is really bad, somebody didn't prep it prior to, but most factory vehicles and stuff like that, it will not hurt the paint at all. You'll be able to buff right on top of the paint, get the emblem off, and then go in there with color sand and polish, and you can get rid of an emblem, never know it was there, just by using this wheel. So this is another good product to know about. So once you get it all prepped, you get it all ready. Now on this helmet, no prep. On this helmet, you can see what has to be done to it. I got all these plastic pieces. I got the rubber around here. I got the rubber down at the bottom. Now, if you can pull all that off, then great. But a lot of the times when you pull this bottom part off, then what'll happen is it'll get all out of shape and out of whack, and to glue it back on, it's a lot of work. So sometimes it's better just to go ahead and mask it off. So we have different masking papers for stuff. We have this masking tape that's see-through. So I can come in here and mask this off. It has a little bit of give to it. And this is from the company called J-Tape. And we can lay it in here and mask it off. Or if we want something a little more flexible, they have the plastic style tape, which we can go in there and lay it out and mask off anything we need. Highly flexible. It'll go in there and mask off any shape we need. Same with around here. Now we do this all prior to prep also. And the reason why we do it prior to is because we don't want to go in there and actually scratch the rubber. So once that's all masked off, ready to go, then we can go in there and we can start prepping it. Now because this is all full graphics, we'd want to go in there with something a little more rough. And what I'll use a 150 grit on something like that. It's pretty rough. It's going to really scratch the surface. And the way I use my soft sanding blocks is I'll take the sticky part. First I'll expose the sticky part. Take the sticky part, I'll lay it down on the surface. Right? Then I'll take the block and push the block to the surface. So now what that does is that actually crowns the paper. So now our block is all crowned, ready to sit there and sand. So now what I'll do is I'll sand it to where the graphics are pretty much flat. And we can take the tape, the sandpaper, in some small areas, fold it over itself, and then we have a little sanding block to go in there and sand the areas. Now I'm going to sand all the plastic parts and everything else. Those are all going to be painted with the helmet design. So we don't need to do that. Now what you don't want to do is sit there and take your finger and sand with your finger, because what you'll do is you'll actually put a groove in there. That's the whole purpose of using a sanding block, is it gets your fingers out of the work. Plus, using a sanding block, you'll have your fingerprints the next day. But in tight areas, when you want to get inside those tight areas, you can get in there and sand away. Okay, now with this sanded out with 150 grit, once this is all sanded out, we have to use a special primer on it. Something that's going to fill up that 150 grit scratch.
Rick, what do you do if you go through the stickers underneath?
If you go into the stickers underneath, then shoot a primer on it. You're going to have to shoot it light and make sure that it doesn't start lifting. If it starts to lift, then you're going to have to use a water-based primer sealer to lock down what's underneath. And then we sand that out and then put our primers on top of that. Try not to go into the stickers. If you do, you do. If you know, just sit there and you'll have to go some coats on and make sure that it doesn't start lifting underneath. Usually it doesn't. The stickers are pretty durable. They shot urethane clear over the top of them, so they're already a chemical-based, resistant style sticker. But if you do go into the stickers, go ahead and put a coat of primer on it, sand it flat, and make sure it doesn't lift. So what I use is poly primer. This is made by a company called PCL. It's a fiberglass resin-based primer. So this primer uses MEK as a hardener, and it's a, I don't even know the mix ratio, I think it's 100 to 1 or something like that. It's to 1 quart of paint, it's 1 ounce or 2 ounces of hardener. Now, this primer goes on super thick, so I reduce it down a little bit with an acetone. And shoot light coats, build it up. You can this build will actually build almost a 1/16 of an inch thick. So you can imagine what you can vary with this if you sit there and do multiple layers. Now what they recommend is 3 coats. If you need more, let the 3 coats dry, sand it down, and then do another application of 3 more coats. So that way you can build it up slowly. You don't want to just bury it on and then hope that it doesn't crack out later. This does have some flex in it, but not much. So this is not a flexible primer. They have special primers for flexible surfaces. But this is what I shot on the plastic hard hat. So, you know, the plastic has some flex in it. It's not going to flex that much. You can think about how much flex a hood has and door panels and other parts on a vehicle with just expansion and contraction of the metal. So if it can handle that, it's going to handle a plastic hard hat. Now painting something like a rubber snorkel on an intake, I don't know if I would do that because you have that much more flex. So just kind of, you know, understand what you're shooting and pick the proper primers for that. So this is a good high build primer. You go in there if you have surface imperfections or something that, you know, little tiny divots and stuff like that, you can go in there and you can fill it with this. Now this can also be brushed on, so if you have a little area that you just want to hit the day before and go in there and mix up some, brush it on, lightly sand it, and then shoot your primer over the top of that. That's a way of using this. It's almost like a spot filler. Also have spot primers and fillers for that type of stuff. They have one of the ones is metal glaze that I use a lot. It's not designed for metal, but it works on metal. It's just called metal glaze. And it's a mixed filler, not a spot putty, that is mixed with the catalyst. I try not to use anything that's not catalyzed. I don't trust the UV fillers and the talc style primers and spot putties. So if it has a hardener, I'll use it. So metal goes on real thin, real smooth. Put it on, let it dry for about 15-20 minutes, and then sand it off. And that'll fill up any nicks or scratches or anything that's real deep to the surface. If you can sit there and you can feel it with your finger, most likely it has to be filled. So spot putties, you could use, actually pull out fillers like Rage is one of the companies, Evercoat's Fillers is one of the companies that I use. And those fillers go on thick, you know, 1/8 of an inch is about as thin as you could really get those, maybe to a 1/16. And you can go in there and you can sand it out and do your body work, and then you're ready for the primers. So this is a primer, this is not a sealer, but this is a primer designed to be sealed on top of. So after you get done sanding your product down, putting on your coats of sealers, coats of primer, then you're ready for your sealer. One of my chemical sealers that I use is DTM. You can't read it anymore, but it's a 2-part 2K DTM primer, direct to metal. Now this primer is, if you're painting anything that's steel, in order to use a water-based product on top of it, you need to go over it with a sealer for steel. And that's what this is.
Who makes that product?
This is made by PCL. PCL is the same company that I use the poly primer. Now, all the manufacturers have their own brand of it. Any of the chemical-based manufacturers. So you get into Diamond, Glazert, Sikkens, DuPont, PPG, Transtar. All of the companies have a version of their DTM. So it's an epoxy style primer that you mix up, spray it on. You could reduce it down, or you can not reduce it. If you want a little bit of a build, you don't reduce it and you'll actually get some build out of it. If you reduce it down, usually I think 10% is most of them, then you could reduce it down and shoot a coat on it, and it's going to shoot like glass. It's going to lay super flat, flow out just a little bit, and it'll give you a good surface to work on top of. Now when I shoot water-based, I like to shoot it down, let it dry, almost spraying it as a primer, go in there and add a tooth for water-based. If I'm shooting chemical-based, then I'll lay this down, and within a half an hour to 40 minutes, I'll paint the vehicle. So with this stuff shot, This will seal in all your body filler, your primer, old paint jobs, whatever's underneath. This puts a stop to that. So that way you don't have chemical reactions coming through. So if you shoot a chemical-based paint over the top of it, then a lot of the times if you hit an area that you sanded through in another area, you can get a little wrinkle or a pucker where that is. The base coat will get underneath and start to lift it a little bit. So what this does is put a stop to it. It seals it, locks it down, and it's fixed.
Is this a no sand sealer?
This can be used as a no sand sealer, but if you're shooting water-based products, I suggest sanding it. I don't trust water-based over a chemical-based without a tooth. So I always look for that tooth. If you're shooting anything water-based, Createx, trying to think of all the other companies. Createx take care of this one. So with Createx, you just add a tooth to it. It sands real easy, scuff it with a Scotch-Brite pad, and you're ready to go. To apply the primers and base coats and stuff, I suggest spray guns. You can use an airbrush, but you'll be there for hours. Now, cheap companies like Harbor Freight and stuff like that have spray guns that'll work perfect for primers. Try to find the biggest tip for primers. If you're using sealers, a 1.7 or 1.4 is good. You could go all the way down to a 1.0, which is what this gun has. So these are from DeVilbiss. This is the Techna line, and this is their SRIW. Now this is a gun that I use the most for paints. Harleys, I'll paint a hood with this gun. It'll spray a wide enough pattern to shoot a hood on a vehicle. Regulators, super important, so you know what air is going into your gun, and your fisheye filter, of course. Without the fish, don't spray it. Throw a fisheye filter on it, makes the gun a little bit longer. They have disposable and non-disposables. So you could go in there and you could work on the element. Inside the fisheye filter, it unthreads. It has a spring in there and then the element. And you can see what the element is trapped out of my compressor. Now I have dryers on my compressor, I have filters, I have everything that I need to make sure that I get perfectly clean air. And this is what gets trapped up in the hose. Coming out of the hoses start deteriorating after a while and you start getting pieces of the hose. So even though you have everything on the other end of the compressor, it's what's at your gun is what's going to help the most. Now this element is designed to actually shut off if moisture gets into it. So what it does is it becomes kind of like a sealed element and it'll gel over and stop moisture from going through. So when it starts building up, you'll lose a little bit, you'll actually hear the volume of your air decrease, and you know that's when it's time to switch out the element. Now if you're using the fisheye filter and it does that, you could take the element out, set it out in the sun, let it dry, put it back in, and you're good to go for another session. So I always keep an extra element around, so I just swap it out. I don't even need to change out the filter body, I just change out the element. Lifetime filter body. Alright, once we sand it down, we got it primed. It's all nice and smooth. Looks good. This is what we end up with. Now, I took a black spray paint, flat black spray. Lacquer works the best because you don't have to worry about reactions later. If you shoot an enamel-based black, even if it's flat black enamel, you could have a problem with certain paints going over it if you don't get it all out of the cracks and crevices. Lacquer, you won't have a problem. So after we do that, we could come in with the wet sand 400 grit. Now I like using 400, 600 works great. 400 a little more tooth. But we can come in with a 400 grit. And we can arc it to where it arcs with the helmet. And if we need to, it's flexible enough to where it'll flex out. So if we need to sand an area that's not flexed. Now I shot it with the black spray paint, which we call guide coat. This is a wet-based sandpaper, or dry, but water helps a lot. Now water, spray bottle works great if you're sanding a lot. It's nice to pump up a bottle so you don't have to think about that. So we get everything wet. Now this is sticky back paper, although you can get it wet and it'll re-stick. Really cool sandpaper. It's designed for wet use sanding. It's also made by Soft Sanders. So we go in there and we sand this out. And what we want to do is sand all the black dots out of it. So you can see the dots in here. You can see where the spray is, and you can see where I sanded it. See how nice and gray it is? And then you got the dots that are in there. So if you sit there and guide coat it, now you can see where you sanded. And I can see that there was a chip right here that I primered over because it's showing up a little tiny black dot. Now you don't want to go in there and just sand out that little black dot with your finger, because then you'll have a divot there. So when you get it all nice and shiny, you'll see a little wave. So what you do is you sand that whole entire area down to that dot. So now the dot's gone, and I know that it's sanded flat. So you do that over the whole entire helmet, sanding it. If you want to, take a piece of the sandpaper, fold it over itself, and in little tight areas, you can sit there and get in there and get out the body lines and all that stuff. So this works good. Little tiny glass of water, you can throw the sandpaper in, that way it always stays wet. Pull it out, sand it. You don't need a running hose. A lot of people like using a running hose back in the old days. In California, we're not allowed to use water anymore, so we use a spray bottle and just use it, just what we need. Very little runoff, just sit there and work that way. Now what water does is, water helps lubricate the sandpaper on the surface, so it lessens the scratch that you're adding. It also stops the sandpaper from clogging up.
Where do you get the bottles?
So these spray bottles are in your garden section at most stores, most hardware stores and stuff like that. Harbor Freight has them, if you want to get from Harbor Freight. If not, I'm sure Tractor Supply has them. Home Depot, Walmart, they all have them inside their garden section. So it's made for chemicals, you know, pest spray or spraying water or fertilizer and all that other stuff. Okay, so while you're sanding something, let's get into pattern of sanding. You don't want to go in a straight line all the time. What you want to do is actually create a cross pattern. You're going to sand one direction. Now I got to watch out because my fingers can be adding lines to this. You don't think it would, just barely sanding it, but it will. So you're going to go one direction and then you're going to go back the other direction. And what that does is that helps flatten out an area. You know, even though we're sanding round, it's still going to help get rid of any wave that you'd be sanding one direction. So cross patterns are your best. It also makes it sand a lot faster. Okay, so this is working with primer. This is all your prime stuff. Now once we get it all sanded down, we're ready to go in with the Otterborn new sealers that they have out. Now what's neat about these sealers is I'm going to shoot this helmet blue. Alright? So if I shoot down a white sealer or a light gray primers like this, to get my blue color to go over it, I'm going to have to do a whole bunch of coats. Okay? So to go in there, and get a whole bunch of coats in there, I'm wasting a lot of my paint, right? So if you're buying a metallic or a pearl color, now you have to go in there and waste more paint. We don't like wasting paint. So Autoborn listened to us, and they said, you know what? We're going to lose money to make better sealers. So now they have tinted sealers. So now we can go in with the blue sealer, shoot our sealer in blue, and now our paint that's going to go over the top of it, we're not going to have to waste near as much paint. So this is going to save you a lot of paint. Saving paint equals saving money. Sealers are a lot cheaper than what the paints are. You're going to use not near as much sealer as you would paint also. Sealer covers quicker. You're just putting it on for a protection layer, so you might as well be working in that color. The other thing that it helps is if you do get a chip from a rock or something like that, you have the same tone of color underneath. So you get a chip inside the helmet, it's not going to be a bright gray chip, it's going to be a blue chip. So that'll help you also. Now the DTMs and the primers that we use are also tintable if you want to tint them with a urethane tint. So you get a chemical-based urethane tint and add that into your primer. Now you can prime, all your primer layers are going to be blues, and then your sealer's blue and everything else is blue from there out. So on show cars, we like doing that a lot.
Rick, do you ever use tintable sealers or primers?
Yeah, and that's what I was just talking about. Tintable primers is almost all of the primers are tintable. So talk to the manufacturers and make sure, but even the poly primer, I've thrown a little bit of tint in. Usually what I'll do is I'll take the base coat that I'm going to shoot on the vehicle and mix it into the primer, and that'll tint it slightly. Now, the problem is you're a white primer or light gray, and if you're shooting something red, now you're going to have a pink primer. But it's still better than having a pink chip than it is having a, light gray, or you can go with a darker gray with a tint to it, and then that'll help. Some companies like Axis Coatings has a full tintable primer, which is, it's a milky creamy color. It's kind of like a light tan, and you add almost a pint per quart of toner to it, and then it comes out that color. So if you're shooting something that's an orange base, you could shoot an orange primer underneath it and go from there. It's a lot more expensive, but if you're worried about chips, then it's worth it. So like on something that you're going to shoot a candy over that you don't want to try to go back in and fix, then I would recommend that. But there's sealers that they have. You can see how many varieties there are. So they have violet, grays, orange, purples, greens, dark blues, medium blues, yellows, reds. Now, what worked good for these sealers is you could shoot down a sealer and then put your color on top of it, and if you're doing like a pearl or a candy color, you can shoot directly over this and use this as your base. So you'd be able to take a red base, shoot your tank or helmet red, throw down a metallic layer or silver interface layer, shoot your silver over the top of it, and then shoot your candy on top of that. So now you're not trying to build a candy over another color, you actually have it over red already with the silver underneath. So now you're less likely to get that pink shift to it, and you also have the red saving you candy paint. So we do that a lot on the automotive stuff with the automotive candies, is we'll shoot a base that's similar to the candy, and what that'll do is that'll help you from your tiger striping, as we call it, when you get your pass patterns, and it'll also help with more of an even look and helps the color out a little bit. So we got this sanded, it's all sanded down, it's ready for sealer. Pull out your spray gun, shoot it with the sealer. You can use your airbrush spray gun. It's going to get a lot more even coat. Seal it. Now you're ready to airbrush. If you want to, you can go in there and lightly hit it with a gray Scotch-Brite pad, just to knock down any nips. Now on helmets like this, you have tight areas that you know you're not going to sand. That's where the red Scotch-Brite comes in handy, because then you can take the red Scotch-Brite, go in there, and it softens up. Now I'll also use the red Scotch-Brite pad after I get done 400ing the whole entire surface. I'll go in with the Scotch-Brite pad and just go over the whole entire surface just to soften all the edges, round all the corners. I do this on complete cars also. If I'm painting a complete car, I'll sand it all down. I'll hit the red Scotch-Brite right before I go get ready to prime it or seal it, and that'll soften up all my edges so you don't get real sharp edges. Kind of rounds them out a little bit. That way, when you're polishing it, you won't burn through the edges as easy, because if you have an edge that's super sharp and comes up a little bit, when you take the Scotch-Brite, you can knock that down before paint. If you do it with sandpaper while you're color sand and polishing, now you could have a chance of sanding through the edge and exposing the primer or sealer. Alright, that gets rid of our primers, sealers, and all that stuff. Everybody clear on that? Are we good to go on that? Quick little recap. Wash it really good with some type of Comet, soap, something. Warm water. Sand it down, wash it down. Now it's prepped. Mask off whatever you don't want to hurt. Go in there and sand it. Wet sand 400 if you're just going to go ahead and work on top of what you're doing. Helmets, the stickers and stuff like that. Go in there, mask it all off. Clean it all up. Get that ready to go. Sand it down, prime it, sand it, seal it, ready for paint. Gray Scotch-Brite, start airbrushing. Shoot your base, whatever you're gonna do. Okay, what if somebody brings me a motorcycle? And I gotta prep this motorcycle tank. Alright? Now, this bike was rusted. Came to me, it's a 70-something motorcycle, so I sandblasted the tank. I like to sandblast it, take it to a radiator shop, and have it pressure tested. That way I know that I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on it and then have it leak. Now you can tell your customers to do that if you want. Usually they're happy to do that, because it's just ensuring that they're not wasting money. Because if you have to do it twice, you got to get paid for it. So have them sandblast it. Or if you know a sandblaster that you like using, then sandblast it. Take it to the radiator shop and have them pressure test. What they do is they put a little bit of pressure in it, and they have a little cap that goes on top and it tells if it's losing pressure. Or they throw a vacuum in it or something, whatever they do. They just say it works, so that's all I care. So I take that. Now what I did is I did all the stages we did before, sanded it down, I did body work on it, put the sealer on it, shoot the high build primer on it, shot a sealer over the top of it, and then shot my base coats. Now these are just urethane base coats. This is a Subaru color, and this is a Audi color, I think it was. So I look for nice colors inside that are factory colors, so if I have to go back to it, I can always go back and match it. Kind of makes it nice. So did this, I came in, after I primed it, sealed it, had it all ready, I came in with my J-tape. I laid out my two-tone line. Now what I did on this one is I sprayed it silver first. So the silver was laid down underneath here, so now I had silver underneath the blue, so that would help pop the blue a little bit more. Then I just came in and I masked off my silver line. Now on this one I actually took my time on, and I was doing other jobs. So I had the J-tape on here for, it was almost 2 weeks I had it on here. And it released perfect, didn't leave any lines, didn't do any problems. So what I did is I laid down that, then I came in with the white tape, and I did a white tape over it, masked it all off. Now if you notice, the gas cap's all masked off. So that was done when I sandblasted it. I unmasked it, put it back on, primed it, pulled it off, painted it, put it back on. So that way that it's basically protected, and I'm pulling it off each time so I don't have to worry about a real thick build with all the primers and everything. If you pull the tape off and reapply it, then you know that each time it's going to be a clean pull. So we got that done, masked off, sprayed it. Now I have to do airbrushing on it. So what I did is I cleared it. I only put 2 coats of clear on it, didn't waste a lot of clear. Shot it with my SRIW. Now I have to go in there and prep this for airbrushing. So this would be just like if a customer brought you a brand new car, tank, hood, trunk lid, door, whatever. This is the same exact steps that you'll be doing for that. So you got a nice shiny surface, well protected, has a slight bit of orange peel. You got to go in there and prep it. You can't go in there with just the 400, a little bit of spray, a little bit of water. Go in there and sand it down. Now since this is a 2-tone, I want to get that line out. So I'm going to go ahead and sand it out. Now what I can do is use our block. So now I know I'm going to sand it out nice, flat, and perfect. And just go in there and lightly sand that out. Now because I painted this, if I go through, I can go in there and touch it up. If it's a customer's car that you didn't paint, I would recommend just lightly getting that line out. If you're a little bit nervous and it feels like it's real thick, if somebody else did it, go ahead and shoot it with your clear. So you'll sand it down, you'll get rid of all the shine. I always tell people if it's not shiny, then the paint will stick. If it's shiny or slight shine, it's not going to stick, it's going to come off, and I guarantee it. So that tells people I got to sand it. So sand it. Don't be afraid to sand it. Right? So you do your X pattern and make sure you get rid of that line. Once you're done sanding it, then you come in with your red Scotch-Brite pad and you hit areas like this that you know you're not going to get in there with sandpaper ends, because if you do, you get the sand through. So then you just take your red Scotch-Brite and go in there and get rid of all the shine. Tight areas back here, Scotch-Brite pad. Make sure that you get rid of all of the shine. Please, that's all I can say is get rid of the shine. Nobody wants shiny. All right. One thing I did forget to mention, probably because I haven't used it enough, is one of these. These things make it to where you can stick around for a while. Without this, you're on your own. Especially when you're dealing with the urethane primers and the poly primers and just sanding and chemicals and dust and all that stuff. These are a charcoal-based filter. Has an outside filter to stop dust and a charcoal filter, which is a live filter basically, and there is a due date on it. Now 3M says I think it's 24 hours once you pull it out of the package and activate it with oxygen. You have 24 or 30 hours or something, like some ridiculous short time. So these masks, they say, are only good for a certain amount of time. Now they say because they know, I'm assuming, I hope. I don't know who they is, but they do say. So an air supplied respirator is your best bet if you're going to be doing this full time and shooting a whole bunch. Otherwise, figure a mask into every job. If you got a bite coming in and you know you're going to be shooting clear and primers, go, okay, we got to add Harbor Freight has it for like 15 bucks. We got to add 15 bucks onto the job cost. Sorry, but that's my life and that's what you got to pay. Now with shooting water-based paints, the charcoal's not really necessary, but if you're a health freak and you're eating healthy and all that other stuff, then get one of these. If you're like me and you eat McDonald's and everything else that's going to kill you anyways, most likely your heart's going to stop before your lungs are. But either way, just got to put that out there that you got to be safe. All right, So now we're sanding this, get it all ready, prepped and ready. Once it's all sanded, we can go ahead and start to airbrush. But how do we clean off all this stuff? Usually I use water. I love the blue shop towels. I don't have any with me, but the shop towels that are blue, they leave less lint. So you wipe it down with that, and then take alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and wipe it all down with rubbing alcohol. That's one of the household style cleaners. If not, they make grease and wax removers. They have water-based style ones, which are all California legal now. And they have the chemical-based, which we can't get anymore. So the chemical-based worked really well. It also pulled off adhesive and other stuff. They say that paint thinner will work on your water-based paints. I've never tried it due to the fact that, to me, paint thinner all had an oil to it. It always kind of, you put it in water and you kind of see an oil base to it. And I see that and I'm worried about adhesion. But AutoAir says that that'll work as a pre-cleaner prior to clear and everything else. I don't use it. I use the water-based cleaners and go from there. So that's basically it. Once you get your airbrushing done, you're ready for clear. That's a whole nother class. Is there any questions? It's got to at least be 2 questions on prep. I mean, this is like a huge undertaking. This is the foundation for all of your artwork. All right, so we covered everything, right? We're good? You guys know how to prep? We're ready to airbrush? All right, we're gonna have a hiatus this week. Next week, this coming up week, we're not gonna have class. Going out, gonna go have some fun on some quads and probably kill myself and some other stuff. But the following week, we're gonna get into doing some work on hard surfaces.
Did you mention 1K etch?
The 1K etch is basically, Bulldog, what we talked about with this. Etching primers, I don't use too much. Like I said, I like stuff with a catalyst into it. So I like the catalyst to go in there and really grab. Alright, I like catalyst to go in there and really grab onto. Plus, when you put something over the top of it, the 2 catalysts will work into each other. The isocyanates help actually melt the products into each other. So I just don't trust 1K products. So which is, when they mean 1K, they mean no hardener into it. It's basically like lacquer-based primers were a 1K. You just basically add a reducer and spray it. With some of the metal etching primers, they just put it in the gun and spray it. So I use direct to metals, and that has a catalyst in it.
Even on bare metal?
Even on bare metal, that's what direct to metal is. We were talking about that earlier. This primer is a DTM, which means direct to metal. And that's your metal primers. It works on aluminum. I can read the back. Hold on, let's see. All right. Excellent corrosion resistance and adhesion when applied over properly prepared steel, galvanized, aluminum, and fiberglass. So this is designed for all that. I also use it over previous paints, body fillers, and everything. It just makes sure that I don't get shrink back later on. So this is kind of my go-to sealer and working over any type of metal surfaces. Answer the question? It's got a catalyst, reduce it down. It also could go on high build, so you could actually get a build out of it if you wanted a building sandable primer too. Make sure you use a tack cloth. You don't need to talk about that, right? We'll talk about that when we're airbrushing too and base coating. But this is our tack cloth. I like the ones that are like real sticky. I don't trust the ones that aren't that sticky. So I go for some of the stickier style tack cloths. And then you just go in there, tack cloth it off, and you're good to go. And sometimes what I'll do is open up 3 or 4 packages of tack cloth, put them all together, and then I got a big wad of tack cloths so I can do a big surface.
Is it the same process with DTM clears?
I've never used a direct to metal clear. I know a couple companies that use them. I've never used them. Haven't really cleared over stuff, you know. Aluminums, I know a lot of people are doing the ground aluminum effect and they want to clear over it. I've done urethane clears and haven't had a problem, but I'm sure if it was in use as a, you know, usable piece of, I don't know, truck hood or car, I guess you could have a problem with having adhesion problems. But most of the panels that I've done have just been up on a wall. So, you know, you really don't get into people chipping it and stuff like that. I know that, I think ALSA makes a direct to metal clear. That's the only company that I know that has one that's designed for sticking to like chrome and polished aluminum and stuff like that. I've never tried it, so I don't know how well it works. If you guys want to try it and throw it up on Airbrushing for Newbies and let us know how well it works, then that would be awesome. Any other questions? We good? Any other questions you guys have on prep? Throw it on Airbrushing for Newbies. I'm Rick Primo, Primo Customs. Have a great day.